Hi, I'm Blake Lively, and I'm going to be taking the BuzzFeed quiz, which iconic Blake Lively character?
Hi besties, I am Dhruvyata Bashan Lashari with Corventa. Today we should discuss about
The whispers began as nothing more than background noise, a faint tremor in Hollywood's already trembling gossip machine. But when the rumor sharpened into a headline, it detonated across the industry with the force of a nuclear blast. Taylor Swift, the world's biggest pop star, the one person everyone thought was untouchable in this swirling legal hurricane, might actually be dragged into the center of the Justin Baldoni versus Blake Lively case, not as a bystander, not as a sympathetic friend, but as a potential witness whose sworn testimony could reshape the narrative entirely. And as soon as the possibility surfaced, the frenzy was electric, because the idea of Taylor, America's sweetheart turned billion-dollar empire builder, sitting under oath in a courtroom, answering direct, uncompromising questions about private conversations, behind-the-scenes dynamics, and her knowledge of the bitter feud between Blake and Baldoni, was something so unthinkable that it instantly became irresistible fuel for tabloids, legal analysts, and fans alike. Her legal team, sensing the wildfire spreading out of control, rushed to clarify the situation, issuing a carefully worded statement that Taylor would only be deposed if the court forced her, a phrase that on the surface sounded like a shield, but in reality carried the ominous weight of inevitability, because in law, if forced doesn't mean safe, it means vulnerable. It means that somewhere behind closed doors, powerful lawyers were already debating the strategy of whether bringing Taylor into the courtroom spotlight would serve as the ultimate trump card, or whether it would be a nuclear option that no one could fully control once unleashed. And that tension alone electrified the atmosphere, because Taylor Swift's name doesn't just sit quietly in a court filing, it explodes, and her involvement, even theoretical, elevated this from a bitter industry dispute into a global spectacle. What fans saw as Blake's desperate attempt to, and her involvement, even theoretical, elevated this from a bitter industry dispute into a global spectacle. What fans saw as Blake's desperate attempt to reclaim victimhood, and what Baldoni's camp framed as a cynical money scheme suddenly gained an entirely new dimension. Because if Taylor was pulled in, this wouldn't just be about Blake's humiliation or Baldoni's vindication. It would become a story of loyalty, betrayal, power, and the fragile threads tying together Hollywood's elite inner circle. And from the very first breath of speculation, you could feel the shift. This wasn't Blake versus Justin anymore. It was the risk of Swift's empire colliding with the ugliest corners of Hollywood's legal underworld. And the question that began to haunt everyone, from gossip sites to courtroom bloggers to casual fans scrolling through Twitter, was chillingly simple. If Taylor is forced to testify, whose side does she really belong to? And how much truth could she reveal if every word she utters is bound not by PR scripts, but by the gravity of the law? The moment Taylor's name was even whispered in connection to depositions, legal insiders immediately began dissecting the motives, because in high-stakes lawsuits like this one, nobody summons a superstar of her caliber lightly, and Baldoni's camp knew the optics of potentially compelling Taylor to testify would be explosive, but they also knew it could be devastating for Blake, because Taylor's long-standing friendship with Blake Lively has been both celebrated in glossy magazine spreads and weaponized in fan-driven PR campaigns. And if Taylor was put under oath, the safety net of loyalty and curated public image would fall away, leaving only raw facts, timelines, and recollections that could either corroborate Blake's claims or expose inconsistencies that unravel her carefully constructed narrative. And that's why Baldoni's team quietly hinted at the possibility, because even the suggestion of Taylor Swift sitting in a deposition room with attorneys pressing her for clarity about conversations, messages, and behind-the-scenes disputes was enough to shake the foundation of Blake's legal strategy, forcing her side to play defense in the court of public opinion before any subpoena had even been issued. But Blake's camp wasn't going to take that lying down, and almost instantly, sympathetic tabloids began publishing soft-focus stories suggesting that dragging Taylor into the mess was a desperate stunt, an act of intimidation designed to weaponize her fame rather than seek the truth. Yet those same outlets couldn't resist speculating about what Taylor might know, because everyone remembered the infamous summer when Blake and Taylor's friendship became a PR lifeline, with joint outings, coordinated paparazzi walks, and subtle social media posts meant to frame Blake as embraced by the most powerful woman in music. And if any of that had involved private venting sessions, late-night texts, or candid admissions about discomfort on set, Taylor's words could hold the kind of evidentiary weight no jury could ignore, which is exactly why Baldoni's legal team was playing a masterstroke of psychological pressure. By making Taylor's potential deposition part of the conversation, they reframed the lawsuit not just as a battle between two actors, but as a test of Hollywood's loyalties, and it forced Blake into an impossible corner, because if Taylor cooperated, the truth might tilt against her, but if Taylor resisted, it risked looking like she had something to hide, and either outcome chipped away at the golden narrative Blake was desperately clinging to, while for Taylor, the stakes couldn't be higher, because being associated with scandal, even peripherally, was a risk her billion-dollar empire couldn't afford, and that's why her legal team's statement, though framed as protective, carried such loaded meaning. They weren't denying that she might be forced, they weren't ruling out compliance, they were publicly acknowledging the reality that if the court decided her voice was relevant, Taylor Swift, the ultimate architect of her own brand, would no longer control the narrative, lawyers and judges would, and for a star whose career has been built on meticulous storytelling, that loss of control would be the most dangerous stage she'd ever stood on. Taylor Swift, one of the most guarded and carefully managed figures in the global entertainment industry, suddenly finds herself dragged into the eye of a storm she never intended to step into. A scandal not of her own making but one that is becoming harder to escape, as her name has now been tightly woven into the high-profile legal war between Justin Baldoni and Blake Lively, and what began as whispers of celebrity drama has spiraled into a serious legal confrontation, where Taylor's legal team has now been forced to clarify that the pop star, despite her worldwide fame and the intense scrutiny she lives under, could in fact be compelled to testify under oath if the courts demand it, a revelation that has sent shockwaves not just through Hollywood but across the fandoms, media outlets, and legal circles trying to understand how a singer with no direct stake in the conflict suddenly risks being placed in the courtroom spotlight. The situation stems from the mounting allegations and counter-allegations between Blake Lively, who is accused of orchestrating manipulative schemes involving money, contracts, and reputational sabotage, and Justin Baldoni, who has positioned himself as the man determined to expose what he describes as years of deceit and underhanded dealings in an industry where image and influence often outweigh truth. And within this conflict, Taylor Swift's name appears as both a pawn and a potential witness, because of her personal and professional ties to Blake Lively, ties that have been paraded on social media for years as one of Hollywood's most celebrated friendships, but which now stand as a point of leverage in the courtroom, since Baldoni's legal strategy seems to involve unraveling how far-reaching Blake's influence extended, and whether Taylor knowingly or unknowingly became a piece of the financial and reputational games being played. Swift's legal team, in damage control mode, has emphasized with pointed language that Taylor will not willingly insert herself into this feud, but if subpoenaed and if the judge insists, she has no legal shield strong enough to keep her from answering questions under oath, an outcome that horrifies both her team and her fan base, because everyone knows how dangerous testimony can be, how a single phrase pulled out of context or a slip in phrasing can be weaponized in the media, twisted by tabloids, and magnified by social media warriors into narratives that spiral far beyond the courtroom, threatening to tarnish the pristine brand she has spent over a decade constructing. What makes this development even more gripping is the perception that Blake Lively, in her desperation to counter Justin Baldoni's aggressive legal tactics, might actually be willing to lean on her friendship with Taylor as a shield, subtly positioning Taylor as someone whose word could sway public opinion or court interpretation, which in itself opens a chilling question. Is Taylor being dragged in as a neutral truth-teller, or is she being maneuvered into becoming part of Blake's defense, even against her will? And if so, what damage could this do to her carefully cultivated image of independence, empowerment, and untouchable celebrity neutrality? The thought of Taylor sitting across from lawyers, grilled with questions about texts, emails, dinners, private conversations, and financial knowledge that may have seemed trivial at the time but now stand as potential evidence, creates a spectacle unlike any other, because Swift is not just a singer. She is a cultural institution, a business empire, and one of the most influential women on earth, meaning her testimony, whether in favor of Blake or Baldoni, could tilt the scales of this legal battle in ways no legal argument alone could achieve. And that terrifying reality is exactly why her team rushed to issue clarification, drawing a line in the sand by saying she would only appear if forced, attempting to both shield her from speculation and to warn the public that any upcoming headlines about her involvement would not be by choice but by judicial necessity. Still, the media frenzy grows, because journalists, fans, and industry insiders are all asking the same questions. What exactly does Taylor know? How much of Blake's alleged schemes passed through her orbit? And could Justin Baldoni's lawyers really unearth receipts, correspondence, or even casual remarks that connect Taylor more deeply to the controversy than anyone imagined? These questions hover like a cloud of suspense over every development, and the entertainment world has become obsessed with the possibility of seeing one of its brightest stars put under the fluorescent lights of cross-examination, where no amount of public relations spin can shield her, where her every word will be transcribed, dissected, and debated. The stakes are enormous, not only for Taylor but also for the trajectory of this entire case, because if she testifies and her answers corroborate Baldoni's narrative of financial deception, Blake's empire of credibility could collapse overnight. But if she appears to side with Blake or offers testimony that muddies Baldoni's claims, the actor's painstaking efforts to cast himself as the hero fighting corruption may lose steam, leaving him vulnerable to counterattacks and ridicule. In this tense triangle of law, friendship, and reputation, Taylor's presence is the wild card, the unpredictable force that could unravel everything. And as part one of this unfolding scandal makes clear, her team's defensive statement was not just a clarification. It was a preemptive warning that the courtroom may soon demand what the media craves most: the unfiltered, unscripted truth from Taylor Swift herself. Subscribe my channel Coravanta for more updates daily. We says to sorry because we did not upload yesterday. Thanks or watching. Subscribe my channel. Thanks. Subscribe my channel Coravanta for more updates daily. We says to sorry because we did not upload yesterday. Thanks or watching. Subscribe my channel. Thanks.